The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Labor supporting this bill. We've supported it all the way through the House, the Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill, and we are supporting it at this third reading. And I want it read into the Hansard, sir, that I'm not always ferociously critical of the work of the Honourable Dr Nick Smith, and I don't often get the opportunity to stand in the House here and praise the Honourable Dr Nick Smith for his work.
Stop it.
But in this case, I will. So, when this bill was brought to the House by Nick Smith's predecessor, the Honourable Maurice Williamson, I think it was the 7th of August 2013, the Labor spokesperson at the time, former colleague Raymond Huo, made a number of comments that I thought were on the mark. He said that it was very important that there wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach taken with the legislation, that we needed to take into account the importance of protecting heritage buildings, and he urged a bit of a rethink of the policy that Maurice Williamson proposed. Now, where we need to give credit to the Honourable Nick Smith is that he did listen to the concerns that were being raised by members of this House and at the Select Committee. And I think that the Select Committee came to the view pretty quickly that if the bill had progressed in the form in which it was introduced by Maurice Williamson, there would have been some pretty calamitous consequences for the economy, for towns and cities around New Zealand that have a stock of old heritage buildings, and there would have been huge unnecessary costs and imposition on building owners around New Zealand. So the Select Committee came to that view, and I think sensed that that the approach in the bill wasn't appropriate, that it needed a pretty fundamental rethink. Shortly after that, Dr Nick Smith, I think, made an announcement at the National Party conference that there would be a comprehensive rewrite, and he was true to his word, and the bill that we see now is largely a result of that rewrite. So there are a number of key changes that I want to refer to, Mr Speaker. The first is that basically a graded system is applied across the country based on estimates of seismic risk. And so the country under the bill is split into zones according to the risk of a large earthquake, and the timeframes, both the timeframes for assessment and the degree of strengthening required is varied according to the level of seismic risk in each zone. So I think that's the fundamental change that was made. It forms the basis of the new bill, and it's something that we wholeheartedly support. So as a result of that, affected buildings in low-risk areas such as Auckland, Northland and Dunedin will now need to be identified and assessed within 15 years and strengthened within a further 35 years. Now, heritage buildings can apply for, under this legislation, an additional 10 years extension. Now, what that means is that a heritage building in the northern part of the country and in Dunedin may not be strengthened for 60 years. And I think that's at one extreme of the spectrum. But that does show that the graded risk-based approach that is embodied in the bill actually does give building owners a pretty reasonable time frame within which to address the need to strengthen those buildings. So if you look at an area like Hamilton and Tauranga, the time frame will be between 10 and 25 years. That's a medium risk area. And in high risk areas like Wellington and Christchurch, they keep the existing time frame in the bill of 20 years. So one of the other improvements in the bill was that there's a new category of priority buildings. and that would cover those with unreinforced masonry features like a parapet or a veranda, that where there's a risk that those things could fall into the public road or a footpath or some other thoroughfare. And a number of colleagues in the course of the various debates we've had have paid tribute to Anne Brower, the citizen in Christchurch who I think was the sole survivor of a bus crash in the February 2011 quake, where the bus was crushed by falling masonry. And Anne Brower spoke up, and she lobbied very effectively for the need to address particularly this issue of falling masonry and parapets and so on. And so I think that it was a major improvement to the bill. The priority buildings are buildings that will constitute, I think, about 2,000 buildings across the country, and the times for both the assessment and the upgrade requirements are halved for that special category. So a building, for example, in Auckland that would need to be identified and assessed within 7.5 years and strengthened within a further 17 years if it is classified as one of those priority buildings. Mr. Speaker, my late father used to affectionately refer to New Zealand as the shaky isles, and we live with the constant presence, the constant risk of earthquakes. Here in Wellington we do. It's a little less of a factor in Auckland, but then Auckland has volcanoes. So it's appropriate and timely that our legislation appropriately takes into account the risks faced by buildings, so that what happened in Christchurch, where out of a population of 370,000 people, 255 fatalities. That was a huge price to pay. And what we know is that the consequences of those quakes in Canterbury showed us, A, that buildings that are properly built and constructed to the modern building standard actually do really well. When the buildings aren't constructed to the modern standard, they don't do nearly so well, and the consequence when a major quake happens is that there is considerable risk, loss of life and risk to property. So we support this bill. I think it's a really good example of the House, and including the Select Committee process, working really well. I think that the fact that the bill, as it was initially introduced by Maurice Williamson, was so far off the mark and had such significant flaws should be a cautionary tale actually to us all in the legislative process here. And it should make us pause whenever the government proposes that bills be pushed through under urgency, and the time that's available at Select Committee to properly give the kind of scrutiny and consideration that important or complex bills deserve. It should give us pause to reflect, sir, that none of us have a monopoly on wisdom, and what seems like a good idea or the best idea at the time might actually be significantly improved through public debate, through debate in this House, and through expert advice and public scrutiny at the Select Committee stage. Thank you.
I call